Hello folks, this is Jacob Harkey. It is October 8th, 2024, and it's nice to be here in community with folks who are watching, whether live or in the replay crew, a burner account. I wanted to pop on here. The title of this stream is Reflections on the Past Year, and I wanted to pop on and just chat a little bit about some of the activism that I've participated in the last year, what I see moving forward, how situations have developed, and I'd like to focus in particular on Palestine. Now, for those who have watched my channel before, you know that this is an issue that I've paid a lot of attention to. I guess it would be a good idea to go ahead and start by laying a foundation for some people who may be less familiar or who might need a reminder about where I'm coming from. I am anti-Zionist. Zionism is the belief that all of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea belongs exclusively to Jewish people and should be inhabited exclusively by Jewish people. Prior to 1948, that land was known as Palestine, and it was inhabited predominantly by Arabs. And there were Christians, there were Muslims, there were Jewish people. It was a secular land in that religion did not play a role in the rights that people on that land received. In 1948, in the midst of an ethnic cleansing project that is still ongoing, the State of Israel was established. Since 1948, Zionism has yearned for the continued existence of the State of Israel and the belief that Israel has the right to exist and has the right to defend itself. The goals of Zionism cannot be achieved without the forced relocation of the Palestinian people, the mass imprisonment of the Palestinian people, or the mass execution of the Palestinian people. In other words, the goals of Zionism cannot be achieved without committing genocide against the Palestinian people. Zionism is an inherently genocidal ideology. Now, I want to talk about this in particular today. Yesterday was October 7th, 2024. And October 7th, 2023 has come to be a date that plays a very significant role in everything that has happened in the last year. And for many people, October 7th, 2023 is the first time that they became aware of the Israel-Palestine conflict in any way, shape, or form. In particular, Western media like to categorize attacks by Hamas on October 7th as unprovoked. And if you've seen me talk about this before, you'll probably know that I would push back strongly against the notion that those attacks were unprovoked. Every time I talk about this, I always feel that there are so many different directions that my head could go in, and I don't have much of an agenda of specific points to hit today, so much as I just wanted to pop on and share a little bit of where my head's at, where I see humanity progressing, what I see as a future involving justice for the Palestinian people. Because there have been significant developments over the last year. First off, going back to October 7th, on October 7th, Palestinian people, led by the organization Hamas, broke out of Gaza and attacked Israeli settlers. Now, to explain just what happened that day and give a little bit more context for that day, I explained what Zionism was, and I explained that in 1948, in and around 1948, many Palestinian people were forcibly removed from their homes. Many of them were forced to Gaza. At this point, just about the entire population of Gaza consists of refugees from that 1948 Nakba, which is what that ethnic cleansing of Palestine has come to be known as, Nakba, which is catastrophe in Arabic. Just about every resident of Gaza now is either a refugee from the Nakba or a descendant of a refugee from the Nakba. The Nakba is a collective trauma that all Palestinians share. Now, when the State of Israel was formally established, it was established with tremendous support from the United States, as well as from the United Kingdom, among other countries. But the United States has continued to be a primary funder for the Zionist entity, which is better known by most today as Israel. Since 1948, the militarization of the State of Israel and the stripping away of the rights of the Palestinian people has only become more drastic. In 1967, the West Bank was annexed. To this day, it is under full military occupation. This is another occupied Palestinian territory. In the West Bank, Palestinians who have lived there their whole lives and whose ancestors have lived there their whole lives do not have the same rights that Israeli settlers have. They're subject to two completely different systems of law. They go through two different court systems in the event that they are arrested or charged with a crime. And because of the military occupation, every Palestinian is viewed as a potential terrorist, so they can be arrested and held without trial. Another word for those arrested and being held without trial could be hostage. Many Palestinian hostages being unjustly held by Israel without having ever been formally criminally charged. Now, bringing it back to October 7th, when Palestinians in Gaza broke out of Gaza, where they've been under a full land, air, and sea blockade. They cannot leave. And cannot leave by water, they cannot leave by land, and they cannot leave by air. Unless, of course, they get a permit approved by the Israeli government. But the Israeli government approves fewer and fewer permits each year. After October 7th, Western media capitalized on a few very sensationalized and later debunked claims about what actually happened that day. One of the claims that was made that day is that there were 40 beheaded babies that were beheaded by Hamas. Many mainstream media sources in the United States and in the West more broadly latched onto this claim. When latching onto this claim, a crucial goal of peddling this claim, as they did, is to manufacture consent of Americans and really of people worldwide that attacks on Gaza would be justified. President Biden himself said that he personally saw images of the beheaded babies. Now, this was later determined to be a lie, and that there were no evidence that there were beheaded babies, and the Biden administration actually had to walk back the claims that they had made once it was publicized that they had lied. Another claim that was made that day was that Hamas members were sexually assaulting many people that day. This is another claim that was initially peddled by an Israeli journalist, which many Western journalists picked up, many Western pundits picked up, and even Democratic politicians themselves continue to repeat these claims to this day, in spite of the fact that no evidence has been brought forth. Now, I am somebody who believes in taking claims of sexual assault seriously. I believe in believing survivors when survivors come forward about stories of sexual assault. Nobody has come forward, though. It's one of the things that I think distinguishes this instance and these claims. Now, following the October 7th attacks, Israel declared a full siege of Gaza, with the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, even saying, complete siege, no fuel, no water. We are dealing with human animals and we must act accordingly. Maybe slightly paraphrasing, but it was something to that effect. And that's what we've seen. We've seen Israel use starvation as a weapon of war, which is a war crime. Evidence has been seen that Israel is blocking humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Now, there have been motions and hearings in international courts. There are two primary courts which relate to international law. There's the International Court of Justice, wherein countries can sue other countries. Then there's also the International Criminal Court, where war criminals and countries can be charged and tried for war crimes. Now, two Israeli politicians have not yet been indicted by the International Criminal Court, but the International Criminal Court has applied for arrest warrants for two Israeli politicians. That is, those two politicians are Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Yoav Gallant, the Defense Minister in Israel. Additionally, South Africa has sued Israel, accusing it of genocide at the International Court of Justice. Also at the International Court of Justice, it has been officially ruled that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and Gaza are illegal. The problem is that international law and international courts, or courts which oversee international law, they don't have a law enforcement agency or a police body which enforces the rulings that they make or really holds any world leaders accountable. And it can take years sometimes to reach a ruling. I commend South Africa for bringing the genocide case against Israel, but it could take years to reach a verdict. And what are the Palestinians supposed to do in the meantime? Just sit around and hope that the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court do their jobs and get to a ruling and take some action before they become the latest victims of the airstrikes? The last stream that I did was titled 1 Year of Resistance. And this was a protest that I attended at Pershing Square in Los Angeles a few days ago. What date was that? That was Saturday, October 5th, so 2 days before October 7th. And this was a rally that was put on by the Los Angeles Orange County Inland Empire chapter of the Palestinian Youth Movement. And if you're local to the area, or even if you're not, I would encourage you to follow them. On Instagram, they are PYMLAOCIE, and they have been tremendously steadfast in continuing to stick to their demands of an arms embargo on Israel, an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, an end to the siege on Gaza, a return of all hostages and political prisoners. And I commend all of their efforts. Everything that the Palestinian Youth Movement has done in Los Angeles and across the nation, I've been very impressed with everything that I've seen from them. Now, I think that it's important to understand this context and understand the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict in order to understand that this did not start on October 7th. And in fact, Hamas's actions on October 7th, once you can look past the propaganda and the claims that have been debunked, which I already discussed, they have a right to resist their oppressors. And this is another thing that is protected by international law. Folks who are colonized and under military occupation, particularly when they are having food restricted by the occupation, they have a right to resist against their oppressors. I bring this up for a few reasons. The question, do you condemn Hamas, ended up becoming very mainstream, and it was treated like it was a litmus test for whether or not somebody was moral, because of course, in the minds of many Western politicians, any person of good conscience would condemn Hamas for their violent actions. But when you consider that these are indigenous people who are fighting against their racist colonizers, it brings a new lens to the situation. And Hamas is not the only organization which has been demonized as they have, because Israel has recently expanded their genocide on Gaza into Lebanon. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a series of what I would describe as terrorist attacks carried out in Lebanon. And disgustingly, they have been glorified in Western media as strategic wins, strategic operations to be commended, which have been committed by Israel. First, a few weeks ago now, many pagers and tablets exploded all across Lebanon. Israel made the claim that they were targeting Hezbollah. Hezbollah is another Islamic resistance group, which is anti-Zionist and has also stood steadfast in their commitment to the liberation of the people of Palestine, particularly the people of Gaza. Hezbollah has stood alongside Hamas in resisting the Zionist entity, and they have been met with an incredibly disproportionate violence by the Israeli government, by the Israeli military. We saw all these pagers explode with the idea that they were going to be targeting militants in Hezbollah. In reality, when you pollute a supply chain and plant explosives in a whole supply chain of pagers and tablets, you don't know who they're going to go to. You don't know who's going to be affected by them. We had them blowing up in grocery stores, in hospitals, people getting their fingers blown off, people getting their eyes blown out, especially if you're talking on the phone. And yet this was seen as a good thing. It was portrayed as a good thing by much of Western media. Shortly after that, we saw bombings in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, and particularly a neighborhood which I'm not certain of the pronunciation, but Dahiyeh, I believe, something like that. And I've come to learn that the Dahiyeh doctrine is an Israeli military policy which justifies the killing of civilians. Hi, Mandy. Thank you for the super chat. But part of what I want to push back against is the notion that you can be pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. Israel is a racist apartheid state. The existence of the state of Israel, the existence of the Israeli government, is dependent on and committed to the removal of Palestinians from that land. Supporting the Israeli government is supporting apartheid. It is supporting ethnic cleansing. Hamas, are they a militant group? Yes. But again, oppressed peoples have a right to resist their oppressors. One cannot have solidarity with the Palestinian people without having solidarity with the Palestinian resistance. And I understand that that may sound very extremist by American terms, because let's face it, most American mainstream media outlets, mainstream political pundits, and all American politicians are pro-Israel. And we'll see differences in rhetoric. We'll see differences in the ways that politicians of each major party will talk about the conflict. It's very common that we'll see Republicans openly committing to wiping Gaza off the map. We saw former presidential candidate Nikki Haley signing a bomb that was going to Gaza, writing "kill them all." This is open and shameless fascism. Meanwhile, in the Democratic Party, we'll see politicians, including Kamala Harris, who is currently the Democratic nominee for President of the United States and also the current Vice President. We'll see her reaffirm that her commitment to the state of Israel is unwavering, and her commitment to Israel's ability to defend itself is unwavering, and that her policy regarding Israel under a Harris administration would not be any different than that under the Biden administration. Now, she'll regularly reaffirm her disgust with Hamas and her commitment to ensuring that Israel has what it needs to be able to defend itself against Hamas. She'll often add a caveat after there, where she'll mention that at the same time, far too many Palestinians have been killed. And I envision a future where Israelis and Palestinians can all live with dignity. She tends to say something like that. Now, it may be easy without taking a deep dive into the situation to hear her say those words and say, oh, see, she wants peace. If you want the Palestinian people to be able to live in peace, you've got to vote for her. Vote for the Democrats. And I'm going to push back against this. Because again, by refusing an arms embargo on Israel, and by continuing to arm Israel, even $3.8 billion a year at least to the Zionist entity, it's an assurance by mainstream American politicians that U.S. aid for Israel is not going to stop anytime soon. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, you've probably seen me talk about these issues before. I have talked about Palestine many times before. I've talked about my opposition to Zionism. I've explained my understanding of Zionism and why I oppose it. Now, amongst the protesting that I have done, rallying for a free Palestine, I have had the privilege of connecting with many like-minded people, standing in solidarity, taking to the streets with many like-minded people who also want to see a free Palestine, where folks from the river to the sea can live with equal rights, regardless of religion, regardless of race. In spite of the fact that sentiment and pro-Palestinian sentiment has grown, we haven't seen much of a change in the policies of the Israeli government or any conditions that the US government has put on Israel. We did see back in May, April or May, I can't remember exactly, but sometime in the spring, President Biden mentioned that Rafah was a red line for him, meaning that the Israeli government, he did not want the Israeli government to invade Rafah. Well, they did. And any red line that he may or may not have had at any point appeared to have evaporated, because he did not condemn attacks on Rafah once the Rafah operation by Israel did begin. And Rafah was a so-called safe zone, where Palestinians, once they were forced to evacuate, many of them evacuated to Rafah. Now, Palestinians in Gaza are living under some of the most horrific conditions that I think have ever been seen, certainly in my lifetime. A difference, though, is that we all have smartphones now. Many have said that this is the first ever live-streamed genocide that has ever taken place. I think there's some accuracy to that claim. It has certainly altered my emotional capacity in some ways. Every time I open Instagram these days, I see dead children. I see children who are crying, who are missing limbs, who are disfigured. It's more disturbing than anything that I expected to be witnessing in my lifetime. And thank you, Mandy. Mandy says trigger warning. Yeah, we're talking about some horrific concepts today. When I see what I've seen and then hear American politicians continue to reaffirm their unconditional and unwavering support for the state of Israel, I'm disgusted. It's also been somewhat difficult over the last year for me to navigate relationships with people who have been close to me and people who I consider to be great people. Many people who I have had great respect for many years, I have learned are unconditionally pro-Israel or just don't really see it as that big of an issue. They see it as, oh, it's happening on the other side of the world. There's been conflict since before I was born. I don't see that as an excuse to stay uninvolved here. And I understand that it can be difficult to know what is the right action to take. What can any one person do? Well, the answer, no one person can single-handedly change this situation. Well, that's not completely true. The president could. President Biden could end this in one conflict. He could, if he wanted to, call Netanyahu and say, until your troops evacuate from Lebanon and evacuate from Gaza, Israel will not receive another dime of U.S. aid. President Ronald Reagan did that. In the 1980s, when Israel was relentlessly bombing Lebanon, Ronald Reagan drew a red line and said, stop this now, or we will stop funding you. And the war stopped. And I think that that's another thing that's important to bring up, because Biden absolutely could call for a ceasefire. He does not want to. And Kamala Harris, his vice president, and the current Democratic nominee for president of the United States, has said that her policy will not be different. As far as what actions people can take, you can protest. And I encourage you, wherever you are, to look up and see if there are PYM or SJP chapters near you. Again, PYM is Palestinian Youth Movement, and the chapter nearest to me is the Los Angeles Orange County Inland Empire chapter, which posts regularly on Instagram at PYMLAOCIE. SJP stands for Students for Justice in Palestine. Many universities across the country have SJP chapters, which are committed to, well, they're committed to the same demands. And in many cases, Students for Justice in Palestine chapters have been increasingly committed to putting pressure on their universities to make statements condemning the genocide by Israel, while also calling on their universities to divest from war profiteering. So, for example, USC was one university that had an encampment, a Gaza Solidarity encampment, and their demands included cutting ties with all corporations which are invested in the genocide in Gaza. I know that USC in particular has partnerships with Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. I know that the UC schools, which includes UCLA, UC Irvine, UC Berkeley, their UC Regents, which oversees much of their funding or their endowment dollars that they receive each year, is managed by BlackRock, which is another untrustworthy corporation, which has been known to be tied up in the military-industrial complex. So that's one thing you can do. You can look up local PYM chapters and local SJP chapters. You can reach out to your elected representatives and let them know. Introduce yourself. You can tell them your name. Tell them, I live in your district and I am calling on you to support an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, an end to the siege on Gaza, and an arms embargo on Israel. It's doubtful to me that many folks in the Senate or the House of Representatives are going to be supportive of such measures, but by continuing to pressure them, we have the potential for a collective impact. In addition to that, you can look up Palestine action toolkits in order to donate eSIMs to folks in Gaza so that folks in Gaza can have access to internet in spite of power being shut off in many areas and circumstances by the state of Israel. Beyond that, you can continue to educate yourself and continue to amplify educational resources that are shining a light on the truth of what's going on in Gaza. Folks, over the last year, I have become very disillusioned with the country that I live in. I cannot say that I'm very proud to be an American. If you've watched this channel for months, you've probably heard me talk quite a bit about towing the line between activism and journalism, and where do you draw the line between activism and journalism? It's a question that I continue to wrestle with. I would certainly consider myself an activist. But at the same time, I think it's worthwhile for folks to become citizen journalists. And whether or not you're aiming to be employed by a major journalism corporation, anybody, especially in the age of smartphones, has the ability to start filming and start documenting and put their opinion on the record. That's what I'm doing here. How much of an impact I can have by myself? Hard to say. But the more of us that raise our voices, and the more of us that continue to be steadfast in our demands for a free Palestine, all the more potential we have for greater impact. I do see Mandy McGee mention another charity in the chat here. That's the PCRF. That's the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, I believe. That is another trustworthy charity that I encourage folks to donate to if you have the means. Yeah, Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. Thank you, Mandy. I wish that there was a positive note that I could end on. It is hard to remain optimistic these days, but I choose to remain optimistic even when times seem dark. because we gotta hope for the best. We've got to work toward a better future. Even if the odds seem against us, we've got to work toward a better future. I will also plug that I am voting for Jill Stein, who is running for president with the Green Party. And when it comes to optimism, even when I'm feeling that the odds are against us, this is just one other way. By refusing to vote for the Democrats, refusing to vote for the Republicans, as both of them have committed to continuing for-profit wars, endless wars, and genocide. Voting third party, withholding your vote from the two major political parties in the US, is one additional way that we can make our voices heard. It's one additional way to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people and stand in solidarity against the US war machine. Notably, in the last week, an organization called Abandon Harris, which was initially Abandon Biden when he was still the Democratic nominee. And this organization endorsed Jill Stein. This is an organization which is very pro-Palestine, is very anti-Zionist, and refused to endorse a Democratic candidate while a Democratic administration is greenlighting such a horrific genocide. Jill Stein has ballot access in many states across the US, and I encourage folks to look into her campaign. If you have not heard of her, and if you are not familiar with her campaign, I encourage you to look into her. And I hope that we have a better future ahead of us, y'all. I'm only 25 years old. And it is my hope that if I live to be old, the atrocities that we're seeing now will not last long into my lifetime. And again, even when the odds seem like they're against me, I choose to hold on to some revolutionary optimism. I haven't been particularly engaged with the chat during this stream. Before I wrap up, I will take some time to go through and say hello to some people. Anne Marie says, "Hi, so nice to see you. I hope you love your job." I am loving it. And to be honest, that's one thing that makes me feel weird about popping on to do these streams. Is the reality is, in my personal life, many things have gone well. I've moved out of my parents' house, living with new roommates who I get along with great. I have a new job. I like my job. I like my students. I like my principal. I like my coworkers. All around, things are going pretty well in my personal life. But still, it's hard to be happy all the time when I know my government is funding a genocide. So I'll continue to do what I can to stand against it. But thank you, Anne Marie. The Dusty Soda Dispenser is in here. He says, "Hey Jacob, how are you? Hope all is well." I'm hanging in there. One day at a time. But thank you, Dusty. I hope you're doing okay too, by the way. This is another thing. There's only so many news stories that I can cover at a time. But right now, we are seeing horrific hurricanes on the East Coast and in the South. So Dusty, I know you're in Clearwater, Florida. I'm not sure exactly which parts of Florida right now are under evacuation, or if you're needing to relocate, but I hope that you're okay. I hope that things are okay on your end, and I hope that if you need to evacuate, that you have a place to go. And really, not just Dusty, but anybody who's watching this, who's in any location that is impacted by hurricanes right now, I hope that you're all okay. And I will throw out there that it's been especially horrific to see additional billions of dollars being approved to go to Israel, while meanwhile, there are Americans here who are suffering, who may not have a place to go, who may not have access to food or other life-saving necessary aid that they need. And Biden's been pressed about why isn't he doing more? Why hasn't he given more to help these people? He says, oh, well, we're doing all we can. Well, it's not enough. And we know that more resources are available because we have a seemingly bottomless pit of money and weapons going to Israel. It can be tough these days for me to not connect many news stories back to my political views. Hi Fingy, hi The Battle, hi SP Chivi, and thank you for all your kind comments, Lisa. And Lisa points out, it's so extraordinarily difficult to navigate personal relationships when you look at humanity, honestly. Completely. I mean, not just from people who are ardently pro-Israel, but also from liberals who have yelled at me and yelled at leftists for not supporting Kamala Harris. It's really, there's a saying that's thrown around a lot on the political left, which is scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. And I've come to realize over the last year, there's a lot of truth to this statement, in that a lot of people who identify as liberal, many of whom are registered with the Democratic Party, will claim to have humanitarian values and care about equal rights for all. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, they'll continue to support their party, even if their party is committing a genocide, as long as it means beating the other major political party. Some of them will yell at me that Trump will be worse on Gaza. How do you get worse than genocide? Is there worse than genocide? And I believe in democracy. I believe that everybody should have the right to cast their vote as they see fit. But seeing the degree to which some liberals are just unwilling to budge at all, and unwilling to even really see US funding for Israel as a serious issue that's worth taking into consideration when casting your vote. It's been disturbing to me, to say the least. And yes, it has impacted personal relationships. Mandy points out, which is why I just do what I can to share resources for people, and I do art. There is absolutely a role for the artist to play in conflicts like these. I don't know if there are any Macklemore fans in the chat, but he has put out Heinz Hall and Heinz Hall 2. Heinz Hall is the name that was given to Hamilton Hall at Columbia University when the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter at Columbia University set up their student encampment and occupied Hamilton Hall. They renamed it Heinz Hall after a 6-year-old girl named Hind who was shot dozens of times by Israeli forces. So Macklemore is one artist who has put out great art in support of the people of Palestine. And not just artists, but the reality is we all do what we can. Nobody can be involved in every element of anti-Zionist activism, but everybody can do what they can. If you're the kind of person who likes to protest, you can protest. If you're the kind of person who likes to write, you can write. If you're the kind of person who likes to make YouTube videos, make podcast episodes, there's a role for everybody to play. And everybody's skills, everybody's abilities, and everybody's interests can be harnessed so that they can be as effective as of an activist as they can be. I'm continuing to scroll through the chat, y'all. I see the good Kepu says, what would you say to someone that says voting for a third party is a wasted vote? I've heard that quite a bit. What I say is, I'm going to vote for a party that aligns with my values. The Green Party is in alignment with my values. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party have both shown themselves to be firmly in opposition to what I stand for. I'm not going to reward parties with my vote when they do things that horrify and disgust me. And yes, people will continue to make the argument that voting for a third party is a wasted vote. But if the only votes that are legitimate are votes for politicians that profit off of war, we don't have a democracy. If we can only vote for one of the two major parties, and both of those parties are on the same side of all international conflicts involving the US or any US allies, we don't have democracy. And I believe in democracy. So I'm going to vote for the party that is in alignment with my values. And in this election, that party is the Green Party. But that's a good question, because this is a criticism that will be hurled just about any time I say that I am voting for the Green Party. So it's a good question. All right. Well, everybody who's watching, whether you're watching on the live stream or watching on the replay crew, I hope that you're all safe. And I encourage you to continue educating yourself and continue doing what you can to stand on the side of justice. We've got less than a month until the US election. I will undoubtedly be back on here to chat more with you all between now and then. But in the meantime, free Palestine. Stay safe. Continue to educate yourself and others. And I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye, everybody.